what Scandinavian design represented to us in the Western world particularly, and why it was so important at mid-century. And the cursor's gone again. Okay, starting with Scandinavian design. First of all, these are Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries up here. I'm not even circling the right place. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. That's 5 countries. Properly speaking, Scandinavia is Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. This is the Scandinavian peninsula. The other 2 have kind of gotten lumped together, and you say Scandinavia, you mean all of them, but properly speaking, technically, they're the Nordic countries. Iceland is well off by itself, halfway between Greenland or then the Western America and Norway. Finland is actually, in its earlier part of its history, bounced back between Sweden and Russia, and is heavily influenced by Russia, as you can see by its location. In history, Sweden and Denmark were international powers, or were sea powers as early as the 12th century, and they kind of traded influence between them and traded ownership of or control over the other countries. But we treat them as a unit because they have such a shared history. They were actually really apart from Europe through most of their history because of being separated by water and so close together themselves. They had a long folk tradition, a long and very strong craft tradition. They are not necessarily always cold because, as you see, they're surrounded by water. I mean, up here, it gets very cold. Most of the rest of it is more temperate than you might expect for countries this far north. But partly because of the cold, and what is true is they're dark a lot of the time. Not dark all of the time. You've heard the term, or you may have heard the term, land of the midnight sun. I would say at this time of year, it would be very dark by now. And in the morning when you get up, it would be much darker. There are fewer days of sunlight, fewer hours of sunlight. So what happens, partly because of that, and partly because they are so surrounded by nature. There are great forests, there are lakes, there are mountains, and a lot of this natural landscape in countries that are not heavily settled in the cities. I mean, not heavily populated all over. So what happened in these countries is a love of nature, an interest in the outdoors, which affected how they lived, a lot of natural resources like wood and water for electricity so that they could set up manufacturing, and a respect for handcraft, which came out of the folk tradition. And what this meant is that when they moved to modernism, they didn't totally throw out anything of the craft that they originally admired. So it was really, I think the Scandinavian countries were the most successful at bringing out a version of modernism which the Western world was more inclined to accept or found more acceptable than, let's say, the Bauhaus style. If you didn't feel comfortable with steel and glass modernism, you could relate very easily to what the Scandinavians designed. And particularly at mid-century, this was the Danes. But I'm going to show you highlights of 3 of the countries and explain part of what happened in their history. The Nordic history began with really Art Deco. I'm sorry, not Art Deco, Art Nouveau at the turn of the 20th century, and developed out of that from a country tradition to modernism after World War II. Because when much of the country, and I'm bringing up the history because I'm not going to be showing you all the historic pieces, I'm showing you really what was happening. at the time at which Scandinavian design was at its peak or at its most celebrated. After World War II, the factories in Europe, the industry in Europe was virtually destroyed. America had not developed, was only beginning to develop its own variety of modernism. The Scandinavian countries, because of where they are, were not physically damaged. The only one that was damaged was Norway was occupied by the Nazis. When they left, they destroyed a lot of the factories, which is why Norway did not develop much of a furniture industry. They found oil, and oil was much more lucrative. What happened, though, in Sweden and particularly Denmark had a long furniture tradition, dating from the 18th century when the king had started a furniture manufacturing operation, and when the main art school in Copenhagen had a furniture design division, had a department of furniture. So this was not only a strong tradition, but there were factories, even if they were small factories, that were ready to go into production right after the war. So when they had designers producing, or designers coming up with ideas for modern furniture, there were the materials with which to work and the manufacturers able to produce them at a time when Europe wasn't ready. So that explains why we look to the Nordic countries.